Who was the toughest fighter you ever faced?
The question was asked in Denver, Colorado in the autumn of 1993. A hotel conference room on the 14th floor. 47 journalists, documentary filmmakers, and martial arts historians had gathered for a roundtable that had been arranged 3 months in advance. The chairs were padded but not comfortable. The coffee had gone cold. Outside the windows, the Rockies sat against a gray sky, indifferent to what was happening inside. Chuck Norris sat at the center of the long table. He was 53 years old. He wore a plain gray shirt, no jewelry, no visible rank insignia. His hands rested flat on the table in front of him. Still, he had answered 31 questions in the previous 90 minutes, many of them about films. Some of them about politics, a handful about his time in the Air Force. He had answered each one the same way, measured, brief, without performance. Then a journalist in the fourth row, a woman named Patricia Holt, who covered combat sports for a regional magazine out of Salt Lake City, asked the question that nobody had thought to ask before. She did not raise her hand. She simply spoke into the room. She asked him, in your entire life, across every gym, every mat, every tournament floor, every film set, every alley and parking lot and demonstration ring, who was the toughest fighter you ever faced? The room changed. The sound of pens on notepads stopped. The man operating the recording equipment set his hand on the machine and left it there. The 3 photographers near the right wall lowered their cameras by a fraction, not enough to stop shooting, but enough to show that something had shifted in the air. Chuck Norris did not answer immediately. He looked at the table in front of him. He looked at his hands. Then he looked at Patricia Holt and he said a name that nobody in that room had prepared for. A name that was not a film star. Not a world champion. Not a man whose face had ever appeared on a poster or a magazine cover. A name that most of the people in that room had never heard at all. In the next 4 minutes, he would explain why, and the answer would rewrite everything that room thought it understood about what it means to be the hardest man alive. Nobody who was in that room that day has forgotten what they heard, and yet for 23 years, the story stayed in the room. This is what Chuck Norris said: before the name is given, the room must be understood. Because the name means nothing without the years that preceded it. And the years began not in Hollywood, not in Korea where Norris was stationed and first encountered Tong So-do, not in the tournaments that would eventually make him a 6-time world champion. The years that matter for this story began in a small commercial gym in Van Nuys, California, in the winter of 1963. Chuck Norris was 23 years old. He had been training in Tang Soo Do for 2 years. He had the discipline of a man shaped by military service, and the hunger of a man who had discovered, late, the thing he was built for. The gym was owned by a man named Harold Burkett, who was 51 years old, had fought in the Pacific Theater, had studied judo under 3 different masters, and who ran his establishment with the specific economy of a man who had no patience for waste. Burkett had seen a great many young men arrive in his gym. Most of them left within 6 months. A few stayed. Fewer still returned. The floor of the gym was covered in blue canvas that had been replaced twice. The windows along the east wall were painted over for privacy. There was a smell of liniment and old rubber that Norris would decades later describe as the most honest smell he had ever encountered. There were 12 men training on a Tuesday afternoon when Norris first walked through the door. He looked at each of them. One of them looked back. That man's name was Roy Whitfield. Roy Whitfield was 38 years old in 1963. He stood 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighed 206 pounds. He had been training in combat systems for 16 years. He had studied judo formally and earned a rank that placed him among the top 40 practitioners on the West Coast. He had studied boxing under a trainer in Fresno who had produced 2 professional prospects. He had spent 14 months working as a sparring partner for professional fighters in Los Angeles, a role that required him to absorb punishment methodically, without ego, while teaching the man across from him something useful. He had never competed in public. He had never sought a title.
He had no trophies. There was no record of him in any tournament database, in any martial arts federation in any state. He did not want a record. He trained because training was the thing he did. The way some men fish or read or walk in the mornings. He simply did it. Every day. For 16 years. Harold Burkett had known Roy Whitfield for 9 of those years.
He later told a student in the late 1970s that Whitfield was the only man who had ever come into his gym and made him feel that his own knowledge had limits. Burkett was not a man given to statements of that kind. He made that statement once and did not repeat it. When Chuck Norris walked into Burkett's gym in the winter of 1963, Roy Whitfield was in the middle of a kata. He did not stop. He did not acknowledge the new arrival. He completed the form without variation, without hurry, and then stood still for a moment in the specific silence that follows a thing done correctly. Norris watched him. He would later say that he understood, in those 2 minutes, that he had not yet met the ceiling of what a trained body could do. Harold Burkett made the introduction. He did not explain Whitfield's background. He simply said, "This is Roy." And then he walked away. Roy Whitfield looked at Chuck Norris the way a carpenter looks at a piece of wood, not with contempt, with assessment. He said, "How long have you been training?" Norris told him, 2 years, Tang Soo Do, Korea. Whitfield nodded once. He said, "What do you want?" Norris said he wanted to be the best. Whitfield was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come back Thursday." If you have stayed with this story this long, you understand that what is coming next is not a tournament. There is no referee. There is no crowd. There is no title at stake and no trophy on a table. What is coming is the answer to a question about what real difficulty feels like, and why the most consequential contests of a man's life are almost never the ones that appear in any record book. Before we get there, subscribe to this channel and comment below where you are watching from tonight. If you want to understand how Chuck Norris answered that question in Denver in 1993, and what Roy Whitfield said to him on the floor of Harold Burkett's gym, that would stay with him for the next 30 years, stay with us. Chuck Norris returned on Thursday, and on the following Monday, and on every scheduled session for the next 11 weeks. In those 11 weeks, Roy Whitfield did 4 things that no one had done to Chuck Norris before. The first was this: he never allowed Norris to use his strongest technique, not because he blocked it, because he was never where the technique expected him to be. Norris had developed in 2 years of training a right side spinning kick that was already, at 23, among the technically cleaner examples of the technique being practiced in the western United States. He had landed it on 31 different training partners. He had never once landed it on Roy Whitfield, not because Whitfield defended it, because Whitfield moved at a moment that made the kick address empty air, and then Whitfield was somewhere else and the situation had changed. The second thing, Whitfield narrated nothing. He did not explain what he had done. He did not offer corrections in the way of a teacher who wishes to be seen teaching. After each exchange, he simply reset to distance and waited. The third, he never showed full commitment to any technique he threw. Every strike Whitfield delivered arrived at approximately 70% of its apparent trajectory, and then redirected. Norris spent the first 3 weeks attempting to time a counter to the committed portion of Whitfield's attacks. There was no committed portion. A fight, Whitfield said once, in the only extended teaching comment Norris recalled him making, is not a sequence of techniques. It is a conversation about where the space is. The man who controls the space does not need to throw hard. The fourth thing Roy Whitfield did was this: he waited. He had no urgency. He was 38 years old, and had been doing this for 16 years, and he was in no hurry. Norris was young and trained, and motivated and burning with the specific fire of a man who has found his purpose. Whitfield absorbed all of that energy and returned none of it. He was, Norris would say in Denver 30 years later, the first man who made me feel impatient. And when you feel impatient, you have already made your first mistake. In the 7th week of their sessions, something shifted. It was a Wednesday morning. The gym had 4 other practitioners present, including Burkett himself, who was working with a student near the far wall. The light through the painted windows was flat and even. The temperature was 61 degrees. Norris had arrived 20 minutes early and had been moving through his forms alone, attempting to quiet the particular restlessness that Whitfield provoked in him. Whitfield arrived at the hour, and they began. This session lasted 44 minutes. Norris would, 30 years later, describe it in the following way: for the first 36 minutes, it was what it had always been. Whitfield moved, space collapsed, techniques redirected, nothing landed. And then, in the 37th minute, something in Norris stopped waiting for an opening and simply responded to what was in front of him without the architecture of a planned attack. He moved inside Whitfield's guard, not because he had timed it, because he had stopped timing it. What followed lasted 11 seconds. At second 1, Norris was inside the guard and his left hand was moving. He did not know where it was going when he started moving it. He knew where it was going when it arrived. At second 2, Whitfield's right arm redirected the movement, not blocked. Redirected, in the specific way that reroutes force without absorbing it, the way a river changes direction around a stone without the stone expending energy. At second 3, Norris felt the pressure change in the space between them, and did not respond to the pressure. He responded to what would follow the pressure. His weight shifted. At second 4, Whitfield did something that Norris had not seen him do in 7 weeks. He committed. A short economical movement, the kind of strike that arrives without announcement, aimed at the lower left rib, the specific targeting of a man who has spent 16 years learning where the body opens. At second 5, Norris was not where he had been at second 4. He had not blocked the strike, he had left the location. Harold Burkett, near the far wall, placed both hands flat on the top of the student's shoulder. He did not turn around. He kept his eyes on Burkett's student and he placed both hands flat and still, and the student later said that he had never felt Burkett's hands on his shoulders before, not in 4 years of training. And that he did not understand the gesture until he turned around and saw what was happening on the floor. At second 6, there was a pause. Both men were still. The room was still. The quality of the stillness was the kind that happens when something that has been building for 7 weeks arrives at the moment it was always building toward, and both participants recognize it simultaneously. At second 7, Roy Whitfield smiled. Not broadly, not with warmth. The specific compression of the lips that signals recognition from one practitioner to another, the private language of 2 men in a room acknowledging that the conversation has changed. At second 8, Norris exhaled. At second 9, Whitfield stepped back to the standard working distance. He did not say anything. At second 10, Norris felt the floor under his feet as he had not felt it since the session began. At second 11, both men bowed. Harold Burkett at the far wall resumed the correction he had been making to his student's stance. He did not comment. He did not turn around again. He had seen what he had seen, and he filed it in the same private archive where he kept the other things he had seen in this gym across 30 years. The things that confirmed what he had always believed about what happens when 2 serious men take each other seriously enough to tell the truth. A fight is not 2 men hitting each other. A fight is a negotiation about what the other man knows. Roy Whitfield knew things that Chuck Norris had not yet reached. And in the 37th minute of a Wednesday session in Van Nuys in 1963, Chuck Norris had walked through the first door of that knowledge. Not because he had won, because he had stopped trying to win in the way he had arrived planning to. After the session ended, Whitfield put on his jacket. He folded it first, along the shoulders precisely, and set it on the bench before putting it on. He did not rush. He picked up his bag. He walked toward the door. At the door he stopped. He did not turn around completely. He spoke toward the middle distance. He said, "You were waiting for my pattern. You have no pattern. When you stopped looking for mine, you found something. Keep doing that." Then he walked out. Norris stood on the floor of Harold Burkett's gym for a long moment. The other practitioners had returned to their training. The sound of movement and breath filled the space again. Outside on the street, a truck passed. Somewhere below the window, a door opened and closed. He stood there for 4 minutes. He has said this precisely 4 minutes. Then he went back to his forms. In Denver, in 1993, at the long table on the 14th floor with 47 journalists and filmmakers and historians in attendance, Patricia Holt had her pen raised and was writing as Chuck Norris spoke. She did not stop writing for the 4 minutes he spoke. When he finished, she looked at what she had written, and then she looked at him. She asked, "Did you ever see Roy Whitfield again?" Norris said yes. He said he trained with Whitfield for another 4 months after that Wednesday session. He said that Whitfield came to 3 of his early competitions, not as a supporter in any visible sense, not with commentary or reaction, but simply present, watching from the back of the room, and then leaving before the awards were given. He said that after the 4th competition, Whitfield was not at the back of the room, he was simply not there. And then he was not at Burkett's gym on the following Thursday, or the one after. Harold Burkett told Norris when asked that Whitfield had relocated. He did not say where, he did not say why. That was the end of the information Burkett offered, and it was clear he had offered all he intended to. Chuck Norris never found Roy Whitfield. He has said he looked in the informal ways available to a man in the 1960s and 1970s before the mechanisms of broad searching existed. He found nothing. No record. No trace in any federation or association or registration. A man who had trained for 16 years and left no official evidence of any of it. In 1989, Norris was filming a project in Fresno. He mentioned Whitfield's name to the boxing trainer who had been referenced in the stories Burkett had told years before. The trainer was 71 years old and had been retired from the sport for 9 years. He was sitting in a chair outside a hardware store. He listened to the name. He thought for a moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, the way a man nods when a name returns him to a time he has not visited in a while. He said Roy. Yes, he was the real article. Norris asked what that meant. The trainer looked at the street. He said, some men fight to prove something. Roy didn't have anything left to prove. He just wanted to know what was true. That's a different kind of dangerous. He did not say anything more, and Norris did not press him. In the conference room in Denver, Patricia Holt asked one more question. She asked, what did Roy Whitfield give you that no one else had given you? Chuck Norris was quiet for a moment. The room again had that quality of stopped sound. The man at the recording equipment had not moved his hand from the machine in 4 minutes. Norris said, everyone else showed me what I could do. Roy showed me the distance between what I could do and what was possible. He made that distance feel real. Most men never find anyone who can show them that distance. If you don't know it exists, you stop too soon. He paused. He said, he was the only man I ever trained with who made me feel that I was still at the beginning. That's the most useful thing anyone ever gave me. Patricia Holt set her pen down on her notepad. She looked at the 46 other people in the room, several of whom had stopped taking notes. Then she looked at Chuck Norris. He had picked up his water glass. He drank from it. He set it back on the table. He was finished. A man carries the encounters that shaped him differently from the ones that celebrated him. The trophies are a record of moments. The certificate on the wall is a notation of a date. The tournament photograph shows a posture and a ribbon and a crowd responding to a conclusion. These are true. They are also the surface of the thing. Below the surface, in the part of a man that does not appear in any record, is the room where the encounters that actually formed him are stored. Not the ones he won convincingly, the ones that showed him the edge of himself and what was beyond it. Roy Whitfield was that room for Chuck Norris, a man with no record and no title and no intention of seeking either. Who trained every day because the training was the purpose. Who appeared for 11 weeks in Van Nuys in 1963 and showed a 23-year-old who would become a 6-time world champion the specific distance between what he was and what he could become. The toughest fighter Chuck Norris ever faced was a man nobody has heard of. That is not a paradox, that is the answer. Next time, we will be in Los Angeles in 1971 on the set of a film production that was never completed, where a meeting between Chuck Norris and a man who had trained under the same master took a direction that neither of them had arranged, and that 3 witnesses would spend the next 20 years arguing about in private. What happened in that room in 11 minutes altered the trajectory of a career that was already in motion. That story has never been told in full. We will tell it in full. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.